Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining this session and welcome to How to Localize Your Game Accordingly. First of all, we would like to start by introducing ourselves. My name is Alexis Viro. I'm a freelance translator and father of a 1-year-old boy. I'm currently based in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and I consider myself an all around multitasker. I do a bunch of things. My background is in business development, and I have been working in the gaming industry since 2006. I am currently collaborating as a PR manager with Astral Clock Tower Studios, an indie game studio from the US. I'm also collaborating with Terra Localizations as marketing manager. And apart from that, I am also co hosting together with Loretta here and a few other colleagues a new videocast project called Open World that will be live real soon. I believe it is next week. So today, as I said, I have the pleasure to give this presentation with Loretta Mulberry. Hi, Lore. How are you?
Hi, Ale. Great. Thank you. And I'm also seeing in the chat here that maybe our slides are not showing. So give me 1 second to stop sharing and start
Sure
sharing
thing.
again.
Yep. Jesse, let's take the questions to the end, okay? We're going to go through the presentation, which will be about 40 minutes, and then we go over to the questions. Thanks. You guys can see the slides now?
How about now? Tech magic? Hey, there
There
we
we
go.
go.
All
Thank
right.
you,
Well,
Ms. Pixel.
there you go. We got our tech blooper out of the way real
Yep,
early on.
we had to. We had to have one.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for your patience. So, yes, I am Loretta, Lore to most people. I am an account manager with Terra Translations living in Wisconsin in the United States, if my accent wasn't a dead giveaway. In addition to freelance translating and editing, I also write for both the Terra Translations and the Terra Localizations marketing departments. And most recently, as Ali mentioned, I have parlayed my love of video games into a position as co-host of the upcoming video game localization-based videocast Open World. Pretty pumped
Hell
about
yeah.
it. But I guess that's enough about us. So let's get into the good stuff.
Very well. So before we dive in, we wanted to go over the main topics that we are going to tackle today. We are going to start with a brief overview of the main concepts within the umbrella of localization. Then we're going to discuss why you should care about localization in the first place. We're going to share some insight into the main languages to consider when starting to evaluate the possibility of localizing your game. Then we will go over the main markets and what genres work best for each of them. Also, we are going to end with a couple of tips on when and where to start and how to avoid messing up with the localization process.
Right. So, why do we talk about localization instead of just translation? Localization is a public oriented translation which needs to be adapted to the target audience. The main focus of video game localization isn't necessarily to be the exact same as the original source, but rather to be entertaining and have the same general impact to users in different languages. So during the localization process, more often than not, some things have to be modified or eliminated altogether in order to polish the player's experience. The term localization actually comes from the software industry, and it came to be in the late 80s to define the process of adding and adapting cultural and linguistic elements that were non existent really in the original product. Game localization involves everything from the obvious, like translating the game into new languages, to the less apparent, like removing elements from a game that other cultures might not tolerate in their entertainment content.
Yeah. So, on that note, if we're going to talk about localization, we have to talk about localization as well, Captain Holt. Um, can you simply take your product as it is and just sim ship it? That might not be the best idea. I mean, it would be a lot simpler for sure, but the reality is that reaching a specific market without a local approach could end up costing you a lot of money, not to mention your own reputation as a game dev. While many publishers know that localization is the key to opening the door to international markets, there are still those who overlook another process when creating a global game, which is, you guessed it, culturalization. It is important to analyze and study the market to maximize your chances of international success. if you don't adapt your game to the multicultural marketplace, you run the risk of missing out on growth opportunities in places where you could have been successful. Or even worse, you can find yourself offending players in some countries with your video game. So let's take it a little bit further, shall we? The culturalization process takes into account all cultural aspects within a game, and we all know that it is very common for games to make cultural references specific to a certain country or culture. So it is super important to pay attention to all the different elements that define a culture, such as history, religion, beliefs, geography, food, and even the way people interact with each other. You could also include those elements in the design, artwork, and features of your game to capture the local spirit and feel and make it more relatable to your audience. So, we advise that the first step in defining a culturalization strategy is to study the markets where your game will be available. This will allow you to better understand the culture, values, traditions, and preferences of your potential players. This analysis shouldn't be skipped because it is, after all, an essential step to building up better connections with your potential gamers all over the world.
Yeah, absolutely. All about those connections.
Yep.
So when it comes to culturalization, we would recommend basically three key steps. Step one, choose your markets. Step two, apply what we like to call proactive culturalization by adding content that's enjoyable and recognizable for the local players. And then step three, use reactive culturalization as well. Reactive culturalization would be to ensure that there's no content that might offend the players. Ali, do you have any examples of these you want to share?
Yeah, I brought those along. So, number one thing is faith and religion, right? It's one of the main aspects you have to consider. Religion and religious beliefs are and has always been a sensitive topic. So, it's good to keep it in mind when you are in the dev process. Let's take this example from the very first Final Fantasy game back in 1987. The original Final Fantasy game, you had to revive fallen party members by visiting a church. This was changed into a clinic in the localized release. Even the building's appearance was changed on the outside, and the priest on the inside was changed into a generic, non religious, very bland character. Even the text about reviving a fallen character's soul was changed to not offend anyone.
Right. Moving on to another, legislation is another aspect that you really can't ignore since it can vary really greatly from one country to the next. For instance, in Russia, it is not permitted to show alcohol, cigarettes, or drugs on screen. And it's also prohibited to insult the feelings of religious believers. And this can be tricky since the law has no like clear definition of what may be considered an insult. So it's really best to avoid strong religious themes altogether. In China as well, you can't show violence, murder, any skeletons or blown off limbs. And the image of skeleton, of course, being incredibly popular in video games, could be very offensive if considered to be disrespectful to the dead. So skeletons, werewolves, zombies, mummies, all that fun stuff, definitely a no-go.
Yeah.
And as well as images of gushing blood and blown off body parts, they're totally prohibited in Japan. So there are some tactics like modifying the images shown here, making them black and white, or having them happen off screen. These are all subtle ways of getting around that, zero rating, so to speak. And in Germany, as many of you may already know, video games cannot display red blood either. Video games cannot in limits their allowance of graphic content has led to severe edits to certain games. Due to Germany's censorship on representations of World War II, many games from that era have received heavy edits, including the removal of swastikas. As a consequence of these, many human characters have been turned into either robots or cartoonish objects even, and in some cases, scenes are removed altogether.
Yeah. I believe that even Adolf Hitler's mustache is removed in some games
Really?
to
Oh,
keep it
wow.
friendly. Yep.
I could see it.
So moving on kind of like the same note, right? Politics and history. You certainly have to be cautious and avoid including elements that might be offensive for some people. Let's take the game Mother 2 Earthbound, for example, here on the screen. First, you can see the cultists in Happy Happy Village. What a name, right? We're given a graphical makeover for the English localization to avoid comparisons with the KKK. So, yeah, not so happy village there. Also, the town of Threek was renamed Threed for the English localization too, since an American audience might read that as 3K or KKK again. So, as you can see, localization doesn't just happen for overseas, right? It also happens in the US market.
Right. And as far as cultural traditions go, the US is no exception here either. On this slide, you can see Lenora, a darker skinned character in the Pokemon series. And in the Japanese version, there were no major concerns with her clothing or appearance. But for American audiences, seeing a dark skinned girl wearing an apron in a context that certainly does not call for an apron was something that might have a negative connotation from playing into old stereotypes.
Yeah.
So they localized her outfit to something more neutral. And also, one really peculiar thing that happens in Japan is that Japanese law forbids four-fingered characters. So you'll see characters like Crash here, or even the classic Bart Simpson with some oddly realistic human hands.
Yeah, I mean, as we see that as Western, right? Like weird, sort of speak. Like, why can't a character have four fingers? Japanese happen the same thing with an apron, right? It's all based on their culture.
Right.
So the belief that localization is key to maximize revenue is already widely accepted, or you might have heard it pretty much everywhere that you look for localization. But how many of you are still aren't quite sure if it will be worth it? I won't be looking at the comments, but make it your own, that questions, right? How many of you think that you should only localize a game once it has proven to be successful? I mean, I know that it can be hard to justify the decision to localize your game without having access to actual sales numbers and seeing where your players are from. That is why we always suggest you think of localization as part of your marketing strategy and also as an opportunity to access new markets and not just an expense.
Yeah, sure. More of a big picture thought on that definitely comes in handy.
Yeah, of course.
So, did you know that if you're working on a mobile game, localizing it can actually have a direct impact on getting it featured on the App Store? Many people will say, of course, that the US mobile game market is really tough at the moment. It's hard for an indie project to thrive there with so many big studios competing with each other for the top of the charts. And that's why you really shouldn't underestimate regional markets that are in need of good quality content available in their language. There's a real demand for localized games and apps there. And if you're working on a PC game, let me tell you that if you localize your game, you will absolutely increase your chances of more people including it in their wish list and buying it. Non-English speakers likely won't buy a game that isn't localized into their native language. English is everywhere, but of course, not everyone speaks it. So, some have never wanted to or had the opportunity to learn it, whereas some have learned it, but simply lack the confidence to speak and game in it. Therefore, whatever message you're trying to deliver, it's not going to get through if you don't localize it.
There's no bigger pleasure than grabbing your joystick or your keyboard and game in your own language. So
Absolutely.
that brings us to the next question, right? What languages should I go for as an indie dev? So luckily you are here. So we would like to share with you the 5 top languages to target for PC and mobile games when you are an indie dev. So let's jump right into the world, shall we? Uh, Number one, guys, it is Chinese. It's no wonder that the Chinese rank first. China's video game industry is the world's biggest. It has reached up to 10.4 billion US dollars in revenue in the third quarter of 2020. This is a 15.72% gain on the same period over a year ago. Sure, there was a pandemic. We were all inside playing video games. The Chinese were too. But still, I mean, even more so, they are leading the market in the industry, and we just cannot overlook that fact. Also, did you know that a fifth of the Steam audience have Chinese as their primary language? Most of them prefer simplified Chinese, which is the variant spoken in mainland China. But there are another types of Chinese, right? In traditional Chinese is the one that they speak in Hong Kong and Taiwan. So, if you want to make your game known in the Asian market, localization is key. As we already discussed, gamers will hesitate to download your game if it isn't translated. So, with this one, I wrap up China for now, guys. China has more gamers than the entire populations of the US, Japan, Germany, France, and the UK combined.
That
So,
always blows my mind.
yeah, you guys do the math there.
It's a lot of gamers.
That's a lot of gamers.
So Russian comes second on our list, though it's actually the third largest language on Steam after Chinese and English. Almost 12% of Steam gamers have Russian as their native language. Thus, they prefer, yes, you guessed it, to play games in Russian. Big surprise.
No way. No way.
In the past, Russia lacked well-defined payment methods and platforms and didn't really have like retail distribution networks that the US or Europe have. So it was harder for gamers to have access to official copies. Localization also impacted gamers' experience since many of the games they used to get were in English, Chinese, or Japanese, and gamers wouldn't buy that content because it wasn't localized. More and more that mindset is changing, and localization has a lot to do with that. PC games are more popular than console games. The Russian gaming market has been historically dominated by free-to-play PC games, although mobile games are not far behind. And when it comes to genre, from homegrown beasts like World of Tanks to Western success stories such as Counter-Strike, the shooter remains Russia's favorite pastime. Though fight games are a big hit too, with Mortal Kombat being the most popular of them all. I know it's a classic. Something important to keep in mind when localizing into Russian is that the average word length in Russian is 7.2 symbols, while in English it's only 5.2 symbols. So make sure you leave enough space for that when developing the interface of your game.
Yeah, I mean, languages have different lengths. That's a fact. Yeah. So ranking number three, we go for Spanish. Over 5% of Steam gamers have their computers set to European Spanish. The Spanish gaming market was in the top 10, actually, globally generating over $2 billion in game revenue. There are 300 million people around the world whose native language is Spanish. It is widely spoken in 22 different countries on 4 different continents, including the US. If you guys didn't know, the US has about 30 million native Spanish speakers. So that being said, not all of us, I'm a native Spanish speaker, not all of us 300 million speakers speak the same kind of Spanish. There are many different dialects, which result in differences in grammar, vocabulary, and accents. So when translating and localizing video games in Spanish, some companies go with a form of neutral Spanish that has no idioms, jargon, or telling accents. The Latin American Spanish, is a neutral variant of Spanish that is utilized in all of Latin American countries. It is not spoken in any country or region in particular, but rather it's a made-up variant that tries to be as neutral as possible for everyone in Latin America to understand. So by having a neutral Latin American Spanish, you have a one-size-fits-all kind of language that at least everyone who speaks Spanish should be able to understand.
Right. So coming up next, after English, Chinese, Russian, and European Spanish, German is the 5th largest language on Steam. Home to 34 million active gamers, Germany is Europe's largest gaming market and has seen a greater surge of online games than any other European country. When it comes to genres, action, sports, strategy, and roleplay are the most popular choices among German consumers. More than 80% of PC games sold in Germany were purchased as downloads via the main portals like Steam. So although Germany is one of the largest gaming markets worldwide, Germans are usually more satisfied with the free experience of games than gamers in the US or in the UK.
So for our number five, we have Portuguese. About 4.4% of Steam gamers are native in Portuguese, with the vast majority coming from Brazil. And as we know, Brazilian Portuguese is different from European Portuguese. And in case you didn't know that, you do now. And about a third of Brazilian gamers have PC as their favorite means of gaming. Here's an interesting fact that Brazil generated around a third of the total Latin America game revenue in 2019. So if you're aiming for Latin America, keep Portuguese from Brazil in mind.
Absolutely. So now we are going to move on to the top 5 languages in mobile games as well. Number 1, we have Simplified Chinese.
Again,
Again, I
Chinese.
know, shocker. This year, mobile games accounted for nearly 3/4 of the sector's total revenue, raking in almost 10 billion US dollars. China makes up more than 25% of the world's mobile gaming market and still rising, which absolutely deserves the attention of gaming companies worldwide. Although the regulations can be challenging, admittedly, if a company is dedicated to developing a hit game that fits the rules and cultural gaming preferences, there is a really good chance that the effort will pay off in China. China is ranked number 1 in the iOS App Store listings in terms of downloads, ahead of the US. In general, Google Play has historically had more downloads than iOS, but iOS, on the other hand, has a higher revenue. The growth of iOS in China has had a large impact on the iOS app market overall. And Google Play is actually banned in mainland China. And as a result, many local Android app stores have emerged, such as Tencent's My App, 360 Mobile Assistant, and many others. Favorite Chinese mobile genres include puzzle, casual, social, and racing games. And this year in particular, mid-core genres such as 4X strategy, game of war like city builders, and battle royale, as well as MOBAs and idle RPGs have been very successful.
Yes. Now, coming up, number two, the runner up. This one might come as a surprise, or at least I wasn't aware of this up until recently, but India is a very interesting market, guys. With Hindi being their largest language, it has become one of the fastest growing mobile markets in the world. With smartphone usage at an all time high and with constant new technological improvements in many, many areas, mobile gaming has never been so convenient and affordable for users up there. The popularity of mobile gaming is surging in India, with 3 out of 4 Indians players enjoying their mobile games minimum twice a day. Damn, I play more than that, but well, twice a day for
Minimum twice
minimum.
a day.
So you should know that the amount of searches for mobile games have absolutely skyrocketed during the past months. Indian players seem to prefer to play local table games such as Andar Bahar directly from their phone instead of using traditional devices such as tablets or desktops. So currently there are 132 million mobile gamers. So if I didn't pronounce correctly, Andar Bahar, 132 million, apologies, guys. So, but with this mobile infrastructure growing strong, and with these numbers, it's no surprise that India became the top country by Google Play worldwide downloads in 2019.
Absolutely. So Brazil is, after India and the US, of course, the third largest country in terms of mobile downloads. The Brazilian gaming market is absolutely thriving. Excuse me.
No, you're good. Are you good?
Too excited about the Brazilian market. All right, let's give that one another shot. Last year alone, Brazil's 81.2 million players helped to generate revenues of 1.6 billion US dollars. And the growth potential is promising for years to come, with the country's network infrastructure on track for even further improvements. While Brazil is a key global gaming market, its console and gaming PC prices are actually among the highest in the world. Therefore, most players in Brazil turn to mobile, where the barrier to entry is far lower. And only 5% of Brazilians actually speak English. So localization into Brazilian Portuguese is really essential if you want your game to succeed in this market. Strategy, adventure, racing, shooters, and simulation games are among the most popular genres, though battle royale and sports also stand out.
There you go. Where am I? Here. Now,
You're in
Indon-
Indonesia.
I'm in Indonesia. Wow, that's great. So, with 267 million people, Indonesia is the fourth most populated country in the world. So, a bit of numbers here, guys. Indonesia generates over 1.1 billion US dollars in game revenue annually, which makes it one of the largest game markets of Southeast Asia. The fact that mobile is the dominant gaming platform has a lot to do with different factors such as mobile gaming's low cost barriers and the increasing affordability of smartphones and the convenient access to cellular networks, right? I mean, it's a no-brainer. It's easier to game on mobile nowadays. Also, the rising popularity of esports among the generally young population has Indonesians playing multiplayer mobile games online now more than ever. So, as the fourth largest country in the world by population, Indonesia, it's no surprise that also has the world's fourth largest number of internet users, with more than 171 million citizens connected to the internet. An interesting fact is that 85 of internet users engage in mobile gaming. And as we said, with the growing popularity of competitive esport events, the gaming experience is becoming more and more important for Indonesian consumers. So any operator who provides greater gaming experience definitely holds an advantage here.
Mhm. And for our number 5, we have Russian. Mobile gaming in Russia is huge. It's the seventh biggest mobile market globally, although number 5 on our list here. As you'd imagine, most consumers start learning to play games on smartphones. There are over 70 million active gamers in Russia. And astonishingly, some 40 million of these are avid consumers of mobile gaming apps. Mobile is the fastest growing type of gaming in Russia. In annual terms, it's increased by 29% and reached 700 million US dollars now. Mobile games account for 34% of Russian video game turnover. Android is the most popular operating system, accounting for nearly 75% of the market. iOS accounts for about 24%. Looking at both downloads and revenue, Google Play is growing faster than the App Store in Russia. And similar to China, Russia also has its local alternative to Western app stores, Yandex Store. In Russia, the most downloadable mobile game genres were hyper casual, action, arcade, shooter, racing, and puzzles.
I would say that that's a shocker for Russia, but it might not be, right? So, moving on. Um, when selecting a game, right, when selecting a market to bring a game into, a game dev or a publisher should consider many different aspects. These include, but certainly are not limited to, I'm seeing a bunch of questions coming up on the comments, so maybe this will clarify some things. Um, some platforms are more popular in a selected country or region. For example, the primary markets for console games are USA, the Japan, and Western Europe. Uh, the size of the audience in a dominant language markets for your type of game is something that you should have to do your research for. Also, as we stated, cultural norms and features, as well as censorship restrictions in the target market, are things to look out for. Also, I mean, this is a no-brainer, but you should, I mean, analyze the success of previous similar games to the ones that you're making in those specific markets. And you should also consider the income per capita for the country's purchasability, and also legal matters like personal data processing regulations, which all differ from country to country, right?
Absolutely. I was seeing, I'm sorry, I misread a comment here. We are back on track. So
You're
understanding
good.
who your local audience is will be the cornerstone of any localization strategy, any successful localization strategy, I should say. This understanding must include everything that drives your customers' purchasing behaviors, as well as everything that worries them. Action adventure games and shooters remain the most popular genres on PC and consoles in any country. Same with variations of MMORPGs, MOBA, and battle royale games.
Also, in the US, the most popular genre is action, which is preferred by 27% of players.
And in Poland, more than 50% of all players played puzzle games in 2019 on a smartphone or tablet, and about as many gamers used consoles for racing games as well.
So we mentioned it before, but in Germany, simulators are among the most popular game genre ever.
Mhm. And in Japan, people enjoy playing dating simulators and games about robots.
And also in Indonesia, for example, the social gaming app Hago, also sorry if I'm not pronouncing that right, is particularly popular.
Yeah, we welcome any corrections on our pronunciation as well. Be
Yeah,
gentle.
guys, I'm sorry.
Be
Yeah,
gentle with us.
be gentle. I'm a Spanish speaker. I'm a native Spanish speaker speaking in English. If I mess up with an Indonesian game, I apologize
Oh, you're
in
doing
advance.
great, Ale.
So let's go with some numbers, shall we? And some data. If you're working on a mobile game, it is important for you to take it into consideration these main factors. I mentioned that I speak Spanish and I suddenly forgot how to speak in English. So you should consider the total app revenue that the store generates, the average revenue per user, the penetration of iOS devices to know where to market your game, right? And also the number of native speakers who also fluently speak English in a given region. And before we continue, guys, these slides will be available as a PDF later. Okay, so if you're in case you're not reading properly or if you miss something, you'll be able to do that
Yeah, you don't
afterwards.
need a photographic memory. We will make this available.
Yeah.
And in case you're working on a PC game, we suggest that you access the Steam Hardware Survey. Apart from giving you information on all sorts of user hardware specs, the Steam Hardware Survey also gives the main language of gamers by percentage, which is something that many people might not know about. And it can really come in handy when deciding into which languages you should localize your game.
So, Ale, Lore, your presentation is doing great. You're not messing up. I love it. But how do I start, right? Where do I start? How do I do this? So, keeping localization in mind from the early development stages or as early as you can, like starting now from this presentation on, is the number one thing you can do to set your localization project up for success. So, we advise you to, first of all, prioritize your localization plan. Okay, don't think about it as an afterthought, as something to keep in mind. Oh, I'll just finish my game and then I will localize it. But you shouldn't feel also the need to localize for every single language, nor will every language see the same return of investment, right? The same ROI. So look at your store page traffic, sales, and community feedback to help you make a plan. For an idea of language usage across the whole Steam user base, I believe that this is a question that we had in the comments. You should check out the latest Steam hardware survey and select language row that will help you expand for details. Also, you could release additional languages as an update. Use the community announcements and update visibility around tools to let customers know about your new content. You may also consider running a sale if the update is significant enough and you think that it will be worth it to reach more markets, right? A sale is always a good idea. Another thing that you should know that the less a language looks like English, the higher the expected return. Many customers in Asian territories, for example, do not speak English, while many customers in European countries do.
Right. Steam and pretty much every store out there favors products that are localized. Language support is determined by the in game language settings, not the store page. Although, if your product is localized, you should also consider localizing your store page. Don't conflate language with geography, easy to do. Gamers' preferences vary independently of their geographic location. Similarly, if you have additional languages for your product, you should make them available for your entire customer base. not just customers in any one specific region. Consider how difficult your game will actually be to localize. You don't need to be an expert in localization to do this, I promise.
Yeah.
Take a look at whether or not your game is really lore heavy. Would it be easy to relate to globally? Because this can impact which translation vendor might be better suited for particular languages. Then it is important for you to define your outsourcing strategy, whether you are going to work with language service providers or LSPs or freelancers. Lastly, but not least, we have, regardless of the size of your studio, it is always important to determine who will be in charge of overseeing the whole process and who will be the main point of contact between the localization team and your dev team. Communication, communication, communication.
Communication is key.
Always.
I'm getting a heads up that we are getting a lot of questions, but let's just save those for last. Okay, I
We love you.
promise.
Thank you for the questions, though. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, you guys have already gone through 31 slides. You might unlock an achievement if you stay to the end. I don't know, maybe. So, guys, it is important to determine the scope. First of all, before we continue, maybe I don't want to answer questions beforehand because maybe the flow of the slides might answer a bunch of them. So be patient. As I said, it's important to determine the scope. Okay, you don't have to go for all languages at once. You can do it in stages. For example, you can go for a minimum, which would mean localize your app store, you localize the keywords that you will be using, and the screenshots to go along with that localized description in the app store, right? As we stated before, if a player, right, or a potential player of your game is browsing their store and they don't really understand what it's about, it doesn't matter that the images look cool, because we know that also sometimes in mobile specifically, sometimes just a screenshot it's not actually enough, right? So you should localize your app store keywords and any subtitling or any detail that you could share on your screenshots. Second stage is what is called partial localization, right? Which actually implies in-game text and subtitling. Then, as a final stage, of course, go full on localization, which would include all of the above along with all the audio files. So we always suggest starting small and building up from there.
Right. So in general, it's best to keep it simple whenever you can. I know that sounds silly when we're talking about making a game, but let's try and keep it simple. First, let's keep track of all of the text in your game, both in the scene views and what was left hard-coded in the scripts. Then the good old Excel sheet, of course, keep all the text in an Excel spreadsheet with one segment or string per cell and one column per language. Having all the content in one single document will make it easier for you to implement the localized versions into the build. This same process should really be implemented for store descriptions and marketing material as well. Make all in-game text boxes, windows, and interface spacious. Like we had mentioned, when text is translated from one language to another, the length of the source and translated text is likely to be a bit different. Some languages, for example, can be up to 30% longer than English. So the more flexibly you can design your layout, the better. You should also bear these ideas in mind when designing fields with character limitation. Keep in mind the type of font that you'll be using for your game. If you do plan on localizing your game into multiple languages, you definitely want to look at the character palette for the typeface to double check its language support. Really well-designed typefaces like Open Sans have great language support for a lot of Roman-based alphabets. Unfortunately, though, you're unlikely to find any single typeface that covers every single language, especially once you move beyond Latin to Cyrillic and in Asian languages.
Yeah, we said keep it simple. We know it's hard, but
we'll try.
Keep it as simple as you can. Okay. So moving on. Before we wrap up this presentation, yes, we are about to wrap up. we would like to summarize a little bit of what we talked about today. So you should keep your localization in mind from the early development stages. You should, of course, know your audience as well as you know your product. I know that we shared a bunch of information, but do your own research. See what works best for you, keeping in consideration what you've learned here today. That being said, determine your scope. See where you can start and where you can take your game. Set realistic goals, keeping all of these things in mind in terms of localization. And consider that communication is key, guys. Talk to your entire team about what you've learned here today, because localization is not something that just a couple of people do for you, for your game, but it's built as a team, right? Keeping into consideration the space to write any descriptions, any sentences, any chat that your characters might have between each other. Okay, so this is a no-brainer, but it's worth to mention that as soon as you localize your game is ready for export. You're exporting your game to the world as soon as you localize. And remember, localization, in case we didn't make it clear, it's an enabler. Okay, it makes your game accessible, approachable, and understandable for an unbelievable amount of potential players.
Right. Well, and that is about it for today's talk. And look at all the achievements you've unlocked. You have sat through 34 slides. You have made it to the end of this talk, and now you really know your Loc. I believe we still have a few minutes left for the Q&A section. So let's jump right in, shall we?
I told you that you might have some achievements unlocked.
Congrats, everyone.
That was a spoiler, but so we have some questions. Jesse here says, I'm a dev seeking a publisher for a variety of things, including localization. Shortly after signing, I intend to meet with the localizers directly to figure out how I can make their lives easier. What questions should I ask them? Well, first of all,
nice.
That's an amazing question. The fact that the publishers give you that opportunity to meet up with the localizers, it's amazing. So I would advise you to, Lore, what can I, where can I begin?
I guess having worked on both sides of this, being a linguist myself too, I really do appreciate. I mean, you don't have to always ask the right question. Sometimes just being able to ask, hey, what's your opinion on this? What do you think is the best course of action? Just to kind of get a conversation starting can set you down the right path. So the fact that you want to ask them questions and make everybody's lives easier is already just music to my ears, and I'm sure it will be to them too. So I would ask them, for example, have you worked on anything similar to this? Do you have any advice for me? What are your major pain points usually when working on this type of project? Is there anything specific that you would like to see done differently in this project than has been done differently in other projects? It's okay to be vague here, because I mean, if I know I have my own strong opinions, I'm sure most of us have our own strong opinions.
Yeah.
So go ahead and ask an open-ended question, and I think you'll be great from there.
And what you can do, right, for them is to have a style guide and a glossary laid out for them. At least make them have access to your files. I mean, a well-informed localizer is a happy localizer.
Yes.
So keep that communication open at all times, or whenever you have the chance, touch base with them. Guys, are we okay? And make them be consistent, not make them. Sorry, my English is kind of bad. Keep in mind the consistency, right? For them to translate all terms properly and always the same. We have another one. Questions on the no four-finger character. Does that only count on humanoid main characters and NPCs, or also humanoid monsters and other creatures, bipedal or not? Wow, that is a profound question.
That's a good question.
I don't know if I have an answer right away for that, but Lore, move on to the next slide where you have our contact. Yes, we thank you so much, by the way, for this. Um,
Yeah, we'll definitely look into that a little bit more, and we will see if we can have a better answer for you, because that is a very interesting question. I would like to know a little bit more about that as well. I would assume that it has something to do with the character being humanoid. I mean, Crash himself isn't a human, but he clearly is humanoid. So that
yeah,
is a wonderful question. We'll look into that. I would probably say yes, that does count for any creature that looks like it might be humanoid.
yes, because I mean, just like trying to trying to work on that question on my own. We have a bunch of Japanese games, right? Like Final Fantasy alone, which has a bunch of animals and monsters or whatever that don't follow that line. So I think that you're good with NPCs and humanoid kind of like characters.
Mhm.
I believe that Nightwolf again has another question. Is there any international localization studio that is well known for localizing for China, since the many variations for language call for a professional? Anyone that just translates in China, I don't know. But I do know is that any time that a Chinese studio or that a foreign studio, right, indie dev studio or dev studio wants to localize their game in Chinese, they don't just go for freelancers, right? They go for language service providers, such as the company that we work for, Terra Localizations. I know that there are many, but I wouldn't know right away for any, like, I couldn't list you for a number of companies that work specifically in China. But what I can say is that all of mainland China, apart from Hong Kong and apart from Taiwan, all speak simplified Chinese, which is different, like we said, that standard or traditional Chinese. So whenever you are talking with a publisher about this, you can state that you would like to localize to simplify Chinese or to traditional Chinese. They will know what you're talking about. And of course, any localization company that you get in contact with, they will know about this too.
Right.
Want to take this one, Lore?
Sure. So we have another question here from, I'm going to mispronounce your name, Meshalina. Any
Mechalina, I love it.
Mechalina.
Mechalina.
Any
Mhm.
comments on art styles that are preferred for icons or capsule images per top countries? That is a great question as well, because there is so much to be said about what seems to be an innocuous image in one country having a totally different meaning in another. So I would say, there's nothing necessarily off the top of my head like this always works in this country, this never works in that country. But that's the advantage of working with teams that are native from the countries that you're trying to localize into, because they will be able to tell you right off the bat, well, this
Yeah.
color will not work for us because that means the opposite of what you want it to mean. Um,
Hmm.
so I would say that it's definitely something to keep an eye out for. So good for you for already having it on your mind, and trust your team here and make sure that you ask them culturally, how is this going to play out in our target country, target culture, target region, and really take their advice when they tell you that something will or will not work, because the local, the native people from that area are going to know best.
Yeah. To follow up on that, I mean, a freelancer who is native in the target language that you're aiming to, a professional freelance, someone who can show you their work, show you what they've done so far, that you can actually confirm that they are what you're looking for, will know about this. And any language service provider that knows their business, um, will know about this too. For instance, I mean, I don't want to fill my mouth with what we do, right? But is the closest example that I have. When we work with towards any language, we always hire localizers who are native in the target
Mhm.
language. So that helps. So I believe that we had one question that I missed. That it was from Miss Pixel.
It
Sorry, right?
was, it was,
But no, I have it here. Thank you, guys. How do I choose between a language service provider and a freelancer? That's a
love it.
good question. I mean, I mean, we say it to all the questions, so nobody gets jealous. But these are all good questions. These actually depends on two main factors, and also goes with the previous question as well, right? First of all, you should consider how much experience you and your team have with localization, and how much time you're willing to dedicate to the log process. I mean, working with freelancers can be best if you're tackling the log process in stages and you are not planning on doing all languages at once, so it's easier. But language service providers can be a one-step solution in case you're working on a tight deadline and don't have the time nor the energy, or you don't want to deal with one translator, one editor, and one QA manager per language. Also, project managers and vendor managers are a huge added value. Um, they can be of great help when choosing the right localization team. And as a game dev, you don't necessarily have to know where to find highly specialized translators or how to prepare all the necessary material for them to localize your game, and let alone keeping track of all deliveries and deadlines of every single file in case you're working on a PC game.
Right. Just adding a little bit to that as well, I would say that the localization process can be as simple as having one spreadsheet with 3,500 words for a mobile game, or as complex as having hundreds of JSON files with 3 million words and staggered deliveries. So the more complex the game, the more thought you'll have to put into the localization process and on the team that will be in charge of your game.
Yep. So we have another question from Evil Gizmo. Evil Gizmo.
I love your hair.
Uh, yep, I love your hair. I love colored hair like Jen. So, with localization in regards to language, if you can't afford outsource and don't have the knowledge to do it yourself, is it useful to at least do a base level translation like Google Translate and include a disclaimer that it was done that way? Or is that more likely to show up as unprofessional negative in regards to the game's reception? I would like to take this one, Lore, and if you
Please
have
do.
anything to add, please follow up on me.
Totally.
Follow up. Follow up. I don't know if that came off wrong. Sorry about that. Um, but I mean, Google Translate, Google Translate, Google Translate. I mean, you're talking about machine translation, right? About just putting up some text strings and run them through the machine to come up fresh and crisp, or at least you expect to, in a different language. I mean, sure, machine translations has come a long way in many different things, but you don't have a glossary, you don't have you will lack consistency up there. You will lack a bunch of things that make your game flow correctly. I mean, take it for instance. I believe that I'm gonna just assume that you're an English speaker, and if you get a game that the same thing is named differently in different sections, or that the communication between the characters and the comments or whatever are pretty bland, or are just wrong. I mean, earlier today I had an example from a friend who downloaded a video game and set it up to Spanish, and it didn't say español, which is the Spanish word for Spanish, but it's just a española, which is Spanish la. I mean, like female Spanish. It was nonsense. So what I would advise you to do is don't go through Google Translate. I mean, um, set up, I don't know, a Kickstarter or something towards localization. As we said, start small. Start by setting up every interface, every text string that you might have a 30% longer. Um, Keep into consideration things that might offend any target market that you would like to aim for. And in case you find a publisher, or in case you find someone to fund your game, ask them if they have someone to localize your game. But I mean, for me, machine translation is not up for video games yet, and I think that that will happen for a very, very long time. I don't know, Lore, if you have something to add to that.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, there are a lot of uses and there's a time and a place for machine translation, but I would say that this is not one of them. Like you said, I think you risk the, possibility of it becoming maybe unprofessional or even embarrassing if you have like a all your bases are belong to us kind of situation, and then you get known for
Exactly.
that. And you're just known as that game with the really silly translation.
But you're known,
Exactly.
and that's the thing. That's
Hi, Jay.
No, that's your
You'll just be
call.
You'll be that game. That was your cue, right?
It might be worth it. It's up to you. No judgment.
we got like two more minutes before we got to get to the next talk. So I wanted to give you one last question, and then I'm going to sit over here behind the scenes and move all of these questions to the Discord. So if we've got the Discord running down there on the bottom of the screen. So if you're in here and you have more localization questions, it's awesome. That's what they're here for. They're going to answer. They're just going to do it on our Discord. So, wow, I did not expect a question from this person at all. But
right, who is this?
I have no idea. So what happens if the publisher takes care of the localization and doesn't include all the languages I'm interested in?
Well, Jay, I wasn't prepared for this question at all, so I'm just going to wing it. So this is something very common that it can happen. And it usually depends on the publisher, of course. Publishers usually have a scope of languages they work in. But if you're interested in any particular language, you can call it in the negotiation. As we said, communication is key. And you can also do it yourselves. If you agree on it beforehand and you want to do it yourselves, or even as a DLC for later too, I mean, that's always a good idea. And remember, you can always bring the localization processes into the negotiation that you will have with your publishers. You'll also want to know how they will be handling their localization process, because after all, it is your creation, it is your baby, right? So some questions that you might want to do to them is, will you have access to their localization team, or will you as devs have, no, I mean, I'm being redundant. That's the main question that you have to give them, right? Please give me access to the log team because I want to know what they are doing. That's pretty much it.
Well, thank y'all both for being here and doing this. Localization is always one of those things that I tend to harp on, because I've been doing it for not actually doing the localization, but I've seen the financial benefits of getting your game localized for so many years. And I think it is one of those areas that especially indie devs don't think about, and they really don't understand what it can do to their bottom line if they do go ahead and get it localized. But like I said, I'm going to move these questions over to our Discord. You can go to discord.gg/indiegamebusiness. Alexis and Loretta are both there, as well as some other folks from Terra Localizations, and they are answering questions. Next up, we've got Dwayne from Shell Games is going to be talking about building an influencer marketing program. So yeah, this is kind of important. That's
kind of important, guys. So we're a wrap, guys. You have our emails there too, so don't hesitate to give us a call or an email or whatever, and let's take it up through Discord. Thank you, Jay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. If you're watching, give me 2 minutes.